Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be looking at the story of Joseph, and we'll spend 2 weeks in Joseph. The overarching, trying to summarize the story, overarching principles. What I have is the story of God. So it's ultimately a story about God. There's a lot of stories in the Old Testament about a lot of different people, really interesting characters. Every story, though, is ultimately a story of how God is working through history, and you see that in the story of Joseph as well. So it's a story of God, and specifically how he's being faithful, how he's fulfilling his promises. And the way he's doing it is through a very dysfunctional family. And if you read through Genesis, and it's true with Jacob's family, it's true with other characters you see in the Bible, it's often God chooses... He chooses sinners, like inevitably, right? And you see that coming out in Jacob's family, and it at times creates questions of how is God going to do this? But he does. He fulfills his promises through a dysfunctional family. And give me a quick definition of dysfunction. Non-traditional. Maybe sometimes. What's another? Yeah, it doesn't work very well. That's a great definition. So it's like family's supposed to function a certain way. They're supposed to work together a certain way. And this is not a family living like a very godly family, Jacob's family in particular. Yet what you see is faithful leaders. God uses those circumstances to build faithful leaders who will take initiative and fulfill God's purposes. So we'll cover this for 2 weeks. And as we're doing this, we want to also see and learn how to handle Old Testament narratives in general. A narrative is just a story. So there's lots of stories in the Bible. Obviously they're true stories. They're historical stories. They're real. And that being said, there's still great stories that we want to treat as literature, as narrative. And so just a few things as we get into this to read a story well is one, you want to see it in context. And so sometimes when we look at stories like the story of Joseph, we just go straight there and you miss what came before, specifically with Jacob. There's lots of things happening that God's doing in history with Jacob and his family that shape how you should understand the story of Joseph. And so whenever you're reading a story, you want to see how it fits in with the rest of the story, what comes before, what comes after, the bigger picture of what God's doing in history. You also want to enjoy the story. So there's lots of application here. There's lots of theological points, but you also just want to enjoy and see the story and its structure and what's happening. So it's enjoy the story, but don't just see the Bible as a collection of interesting stories for our entertainment. They're for our good. They're for our example. And so we should be looking at and comparing and seeing the characters, seeing how they act, how they develop over time. At the same time, you don't want to simplify it so much to where the story is just about moral lessons. There are a lot of moral lessons in the story of Joseph, and we'll see those. But it's not just a story to teach you how to live your life. It's a story that teaches you something about God, and so you always want to look at the story from God's perspective. And so we should be good exegetes and theologians. What's an exegete? Can you tell me what an exegete is?
A teacher of exegesis, which is teaching the scripture.
Okay. Yeah. So you mentioned exegesis. So we've talked about exegesis previously. What is exegesis? Give me a quick definition of exegesis, Caleb.
Drawing out scripture.
Yeah, it's drawing out the meaning of what is said. So we want to look at the passages, draw out what they mean, and then also be theologians. So a theologian is somebody that applies what the Bible says to all of life, to how we view God, how we view ourselves, how we view the world. And we want to do that as we look at this story of Joseph. So again, starting with the first thing, see it in context. And we'll do this at the beginning, and we'll also do this next week at the end, see how the story of Joseph fits into the wider context of the Bible. So to really understand the story of Joseph, we have to understand something about the story of Jacob. So Isaac, he had two sons. Jacob was the son of promise. He was the son that where the seed, the promise of the seed to build a great nation went through Jacob instead of Esau. Why was it somewhat surprising to people of that culture that Jacob was the son of promise instead of Esau? Why would that be surprising to someone in that culture?
Usually the older person.
Yeah, right. Usually the oldest son. Are you the youngest son? Yeah. Okay. So you shouldn't be the one getting the bulk of the inheritance of the promised seed, but in the story of Jacob with Jacob and Esau, it was the younger son, right? So it'd be with the story of Joseph, it'd be like you rising up to rule your brothers. Does that sound pretty good? Yeah. But so that's a theme you see throughout. So how did Jacob get the birthright that should have been Esau's?
Esau sold it to him pretty much.
Okay, yeah. So Esau came out. He was super hungry. Jacob held back food and said, "Sell me your birthright." Esau was like, "Well, I'm going to die anyway. Might as well sell it." So that was the first thing. So you start seeing Jacob's not the most noble person. And then what else happened? There's something else that he did to receive the blessing.
Could be thinking of a different story here, but didn't he dress himself like his brother, his birds, and go to his father?
Yep. That's the story. So with his mother kind of took things into her own hands. Jacob and his mother took things into their own hands. They weren't trusting God, and they tricked Isaac into giving them the blessing. And that's something that marks Jacob's whole life, is deception. Him being a deceiver and other people that coming back on him and him being deceived. So Jacob some of his besetting sins were deception, scheming. He also was a fearful man. He feared other people, and it caused him to not take action. And he was a very passive person and a passive leader. It actually wasn't until Joseph was born where Jacob seems to be reminded of God's promises and his goodness, and he starts taking charge of his family. But so you see glimmers of hope, glimmers of good things in Jacob, but he's a very passive person. Remember, after he tricked Isaac, he feared Esau. Esau was a warrior. He was kind of the exact opposite of Jacob. He's described as being a profane, wicked man. And he wanted to kill Jacob. And so Jacob was a fearful man and fled. And then he got in with his uncle Laban. And remember the story with Leah and Rachel. So again, Jacob's not the most passive aggressive. He's a very passive person. He doesn't handle things super well, and he gets taken advantage of by Laban and gets tricked by Laban as well. So some of that sin comes upon him. And just in general, he struggles to trust God and lead his family. But again, you see God still being gracious through his life, and God blesses him. And the reason God blesses him isn't because of anything in Jacob. Jacob is not a very impressive person. God blesses him because of God's electing purpose. You see this in Romans, where it talks about how Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. There was nothing special about Jacob other than God chose to fulfill his promises through him. And so there's a very telling story that really brings out some of the character traits of Jacob and also his sons now. So there's a little bit later in the story in Genesis 34. So Jacob, he comes safely to the city of Shechem. And Jacob very much valued safety. You see that being something he cares a lot about. And there he worships God. So he does worship God. And it's somewhat encouraging when you see the story of Jacob, because even somebody that had a very dysfunctional family, lived a very difficult life, he still trusted God. And even in Hebrews, it talks about how he was a man of faith and he looked forward to the promise. So he comes to safety, and his family starts to mingle with the Canaanites, which is a pattern you see often with the patriarchs, later with Israel as well. As they start mingling with the world, seeking what the world wants, what the Canaanites want, trouble tends to come, and trouble did come in this case. So Jacob's daughter, Dinah, she gets mistreated, sinned against, and taken captive by Shechem. What would you do if your sister was taken captive Jonathan?
Get her back.
Okay, yeah, right. So that's a good thing. What do you think? What do you think, Jay? What do you think you would do, or what do you think your father would do if somebody came and would be like, "Hey, we mistreated your daughter here. She's captive. Let's work out a deal." How do you think? Okay, yeah, yeah, right. You think you'd just be quiet? No, that's what you see Jacob though. Jacob's response when he hears about it from the king. So there's the king there, and his son is the one that took advantage of Dinah. His sons were in the field, so Jacob kept silent until they came in. And this again is one of his besetting sins, is passivity and silence. Jacob's sons, though, they had the opposite response. They were very angry, though they held it in because they came up with a deception. Just, they learned from their father. They came up with a deception to deal with this situation. So in one sense, they do something about it. They do something to get their sister back. And they created a plan to have the men of Shechem be circumcised. And this surgery made them very weak. So when all the men of the city were circumcised and weak, and the way they did this was like, yeah, we'll join with you. We'll come with you. You just got to be circumcised first. Then we'll be able to, go along with this. So while the people of Shechem were very weak in the men, two of Jacob's sons, Simon and Levi, they went and they basically killed and massacred all the men. They murdered everyone in the city, not just the people that did the sin. In some ways, like they're very wicked people, but this level of violence is picked up later and is a reason that Simon and Levi lose their place as older sons to receive the blessing from Jacob. And then all the sons came and plundered and took everything. They're greedy men. They stole everything from the city. And so in this story, you start seeing both Jacob's passivity and the other extreme, his son's violence and wickedness. You see, again, Jacob's response to Simon and Levi: "You have brought trouble on me by making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And my men being few in number, they will gather together against me and strike me, and I will be destroyed, I and my household." So what is Jacob's primary concern with what Simon and Levi did? What is he worried about? Over here, what do you see? What Lena? He's going to be destroyed. Yeah, he's just kind of worried about his safety again, right? He's worried about his reputation and his safety. There's no rejoicing that they got the daughter back. There's no seeing this as being unrighteous. He's just worried about himself again. And again, you start seeing these two extremes in Jacob and his sons. And so I kind of want to take a little bit of a detour and talk about this in general, because I think you see these two extremes really throughout history, and even now with men and masculinity. There's kind of two different ideas for it. And the world will pull you towards one extreme or the other. And you may have a tendency towards one of these extremes or the other. So you should be aware of that and always be looking back to how the Bible defines what being a true man is. And so one distortion is you have somebody like Jacob that's passive and fearful. And today you'll see people say oh, men, they're toxic, they're wicked, they're aggressive, they got to be more feminine. So that's you see pressures from the world in this way. And Jacob was that way, and interestingly enough, he had a very controlling mother that you see. So his distortion was that he was passive and fearful. He did not take initiative to lead and to serve. And this distortion tends to make men very lazy and indifferent. They don't care about others. They don't have a mission in life. Maybe they just play video games or different towards the world. That is not the way men should be. And often they're very overly concerned about their reputation, their looks, how other people think of them and view them, what other people's opinions of them are. And they're just effeminate, delicate, and decisive. So they take on character traits and act more feminine than masculine. And that's not a good thing. But and what you see is people oftentimes, when they see this distortion of passive and fearful men, they kind of go to the other extreme and they take on the distortion of being more violent and controlling and domineering. And you saw that with Joseph's sons. So in that case, they adopt a caricature of does anybody, what's a caricature? Have you heard that term before?
Well, I don't really know what it is.
Yeah, so I should have thought of a good example to explain this, but it's basically the idea of like pretending to be a man and doing like things that men do when it's not really true masculinity. So I'll give an example, and I don't want to offend any hunters, but it could be like, oh, you're only a true man if you hunt. Now, hunting's a good thing. I don't personally hunt, but if you do hunt, that is a good thing. You'd call it a masculine thing. But if you start defining masculinity by doing these sort of more external, superficial things, it's not true. So a caricature is taking on this superficial element of something rather than the real core heart of it. And so masculinity leverages this sort of wrong distortion of masculinity. It leverages male aggression for personal gain. So men are made more aggressive. God made them that way. And they should use that for good, to lead, provide, and protect. But instead, they often use that for their own personal benefit. And when you do that, it's a distortion of what God has made. And you see this with Jacob's sons. They're marked by greed, anger, desire to dominate. And ironically, even though they have this caricature, they put forward this idea that they're strong, they tend to be very easily offended, and they lash out because they don't have self-control. They don't actually have the strength of self-control. And what's common with both of these extremes is that they tend to be very selfish. They only care about themselves. And they also tend to be very reactive. They're reacting to others or reacting to their circumstances and their situations. They're not taking initiative. They're not taking the lead. So those are the two extremes. So now let's look at what a biblical definition of masculinity is. So what do you guys think? So we'll have to ask the guys over here, young men over here, what do you think is a biblical definition of masculinity? What do you think, Ivan? Okay. Who else? Right? Caleb, did you raise your hand?
Yeah. Probably just like maybe a little bit like in the middle of both
Okay.
those extremes.
Yeah.
Like you want to protect, provide, lead, but you're also like compassionate and you
Yep.
care about others.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So I think you're right. It's between those two extremes, and I think a core of the definition is what you mentioned. It's to take responsibility and initiative, to lead, provide, and protect. And a lot of these character traits, and we'll look at a few here, they're good things in general, good things for Christians, whether men or females. So as a female, you can lead in certain contexts, you can provide for your family, protect in certain contexts. The key difference is it's not your responsibility, it's not your burden to do that. So especially in a household, as an example, it is your burden and responsibility, it is your job to do these things. If they're not happening, it's on you. So you have to take responsibility and ownership and take initiative to these things. And so here's a quote from Piper on it. It's an ethos of tenderhearted strength. So you kind of mentioned that a little bit in between, right? So there's a strength, but it's also tenderhearted, it's caring. Contrite courage. It's not sort of this brashness. It's being courageous for the right reasons. There's a risk taking to it. Men take risks. They go into the unknown. There's decisiveness, a readiness to sacrifice, protect, and provide. So this is, I think, the core of masculinity according to the Bible. And you see many examples of this. Chief of them is Jesus Christ. And so the ideal is a courageous and a righteous man, and you could add to that a tender-hearted, gentle at the same time. And so a quote from MacArthur on some of this, he really likes the term fortitude to define it. And again, fortitude is a great character trait for men and women, but it's something that should be, is especially concerning when it's not a mark for men. So fortitude, there's a firmness, a strength of soul that faces danger with courage and bears loss and pain without complaint. Think about how that's going to apply today with Joseph, right? Like Joseph was a true man. He had very dire circumstances, and yet he wasn't a complainer. Conviction, courage, and endurance. The desire to risk, to literally create challenges if they were not already there, to attack difficulty. These are things that men should do. Their fear of God diminishes their fear of man and the unknown. So with Jacob, if you're fearing going out, taking initiative, doing things, the biggest way to overcome that is to fear God more, care about God's opinion of you more than other people's opinion of you. And again, taking initiative, that's a really core key part of this. It's to take initiative. It's not just to sit back, wait for things to happen, hope it all works out. It's to actually go and do something, but to do something not for your own personal gain, but to serve others, to lead others towards a positive change. And it's marked by strength, but that strength is under control and used for godly purposes. And this person, they care more about God's reputation than their own. I'm kind of struck by this, studying more and more of Genesis. There's a lot of things in there about reputation. And the Bible talks about having a good reputation being a valuable thing. But when you strive for that, you tend to, one, not get it, and two, it can overcome your desire to be righteous. So true masculinity, and this is again a good trait for women as well, but you should care more about what God thinks of you than what other people think of you. And that will lead you to do the right things and to take initiative, even if it looks bad on you sometimes. So in this context, with this dysfunctional family where both sides are not godly, faithful, righteous leaders, there starts to become this question in God's program and what he's doing in the world with Jacob's family promising the seed. Like, who's the leader? Who's gonna take this family and lead them to the promised land, lead them to God's blessing? Because Jacob doesn't seem like a great candidate. His sons are very violent. They don't seem like great candidates. A lot of them lose their blessing. But God is very gracious. He renews the promise to Jacob. He reminds him, no, I am going to work in your family to bless the nations, to give you a land. And including in that, he says a king shall come from your loins. There's not very many kingly figures so far in Joseph's sons, but he promises him that kings will come from your loins. And of course, ultimately, that's Christ. But you have people like King David and others before that. So how is that going to happen with how bad his family appears? The oldest, Reuben, he disqualifies himself. He's not going to be the son of promise. He's not a good leader. Nobody really takes him seriously, it seems, throughout the story. Next oldest, Simon and Levi. They disqualified themselves because of their violence at Shechem. Next in line is Judah. So there's kind of this question, is Judah going to be it? And we'll start seeing some character traits in Judah. And then in Genesis 36, right before our story of Joseph, there's a Toledot talking about Esau. And it's interesting. There's people that will look at Genesis and be like, why are all these weird stories in between other stories? And why do we have this Toledot of Esau right before Joseph? After, it seems like, and so they make up these things that there must be different authors that are just inserting different ideas in different places. But that's not a helpful way of looking at it. When you read through Genesis and you see the big picture, you start seeing the author, Moses, he was very intentional for where he put different stories. And when he put a story in between another story, it's because he's trying to make a bigger point. And so I think when he gives this description of Esau's descendants, the point is you have Jacob, this family that's struggling, and then you have Esau, who wasn't the son of promise, and he seems to be doing great. And in fact, unlike the problem you see with Jacob's family, there are kings who are ruling on Esau's side. Kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any kings of the sons of Israel reigned. And this is something throughout the Bible that a question comes up, why do the wicked prosper? Why does it seem like God's people are suffering when the wicked are thriving? And so this is where we come to in the story of Joseph. And you have to ask the questions, how in the world is God going to accomplish his purposes through Jacob's family? Will there be somebody that rises up as a leader and a king figure in Jacob's family? And so then we come to Joseph, and so we'll start having different titles, and we see Joseph, he's the outlier. You come to Joseph and you see somebody that doesn't act like Jacob or his wicked sons. And so we'll read that. These are the generations of Jacob, Joseph, when 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bela and the sons of Ziplah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back an evil report about them to their father. So do you think this was right or wrong? Bringing back this evil report. So some people say like, well, it seems like he's tattletaling. And maybe there's some immaturity with Joseph there. But I think the biggest thing you see is he didn't join in with the wickedness of his brothers. He reported back on them. He wasn't like them. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons because he was a son of his old age, and he made him a vari-colored tunic. And so Jacob, he's not the wisest person, and he foolishly starts to show favoritism to Joseph by making it very clear that he loves him more than his other sons. And Joseph's the son of the wife he loved, Rachel, as well. So this is something that creates now this division within the brothers, and they hated him. They're consumed with jealousy. And favoritism can do that. That's why it's something to avoid. Now, just a side note, a qualification. If your parents treat you different than your siblings, like that's probably not favoritism. That's just you're different people with different circumstances, and they're dealing with you differently. So if you start thinking your parents are doing the sin of Jacob, you're probably wrong. But Jacob, though, again, he was foolish, and he was doing something in a very outward way. He wasn't hiding it. He wasn't just treating Joseph differently because he wasn't a sinner like he wasn't as wicked as his other sons. But this, again, just a very dysfunctional family. They couldn't speak to him in peace. They couldn't have a normal conversation with him. They hated him. And then we see Joseph the dreamer, and Joseph tells two dreams that indicated he would rule over his family. So these themes of who the leader is going to be, who's the king figure, this starts to get answered or hinted at in Joseph's dreams. Like, is it going to be Joseph? Is he going to be the seed of promise? Because he has these two dreams that he's going to rule over his family. And of course, this incites his brothers even more. Are you really going to reign over us, or are you really going to rule over us? They can't stand the idea. And even his father rebukes him and says, "Shall I and your mother and your brothers really come to bow down before you to the ground?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. So his father kind of, again, he was the younger son that received the promise. He's probably thinking like, maybe Joseph is the one that will be the son of promise. Maybe he will be the one that will be this righteous king figure. And so as we come in and start learning more about the character of Joseph, we want to know, like, is he going to fall like Jacob? Is he going to be a schemer and deceiver, take matters into his own hands? Or is he going to be wicked like his sons? Or will he be faithful, wise, and righteous? And this story will bear that out. So Joseph the persistent. Jacob sends his trusted son Joseph to report on his brothers in Shechem, and Joseph's response is, "I will go." There's no complaint. There's no arguing. He's obedient to his father. Which, by the way, what is true obedience? I don't know if you've heard this before. There's kind of a list of things your parents may say on what true obedience is. So one, yes. Immediate. Okay. You have one. Completely. Okay.
And
Cheerfully. Yep. Okay. Yeah. So first time is kind of what you're saying. First time, right away, all the way, completely, with a happy heart. Right. So you start to see that this appears to be Joseph. His brothers weren't there where he went in Shechem at first. They had traveled about, I think it was 10, 12 miles in a different direction. So Joseph, he goes after his brothers and he finds them. He's persistent. Ironically, his faithfulness is what actually leads to his demise and his poor circumstances. So sometimes when you obey, sometimes when you do what's right, and this is going to be a theme throughout the story. Just because you do what's right doesn't mean good things will happen for you. And so we come to Joseph the betrayed. Then they said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. So now come and let us kill him and cast him into one of the pits. And we will say, a wild beast has devoured him. Then let us see what will become of his dreams." So the dream was to rule over them. And their idea is like, well, there's a good way to spoil that dream. We'll just kill him. And they plot first-degree murder. So there's different degrees of murder. And the worst kind, where you get the most serious punishment, even in our American law, and it's very biblical, is murder that is planned ahead of time, that is premeditated. You create a plan for it. And Reuben convinces them to put him in the pit and delay killing him, or let the pit kill him. So Reuben's trying to do something, and his brothers kind of listen to him. So Joseph's sitting in the pit without any water, and they sat down to eat a meal. So it's just kind of interesting to see the contrast of this. You have the brother Joseph, who we learn later on is begging, probably calling out, asking for help. He's there with no water, no compassion, and his brothers go down and enjoy a meal to be satisfied. What other story from Genesis does this remind you of? Is there another story from Genesis this reminds you of? Caitlin? Oh, yeah, no, Caitlin. Is there something? Yeah. No. Peter?
Cain and Abel.
Yeah, Cain and Abel. Mm-hmm. This is a dysfunctional family. Yeah, Cain and Abel, right? Cain murders his brother. This is a dysfunctional family with violent sons. And then you see Judah, and so this is sort of the next figure that could be their leader, because, again, Simon and Levi are disqualified, the oldest. Reuben is disqualified. The next in line is Judah. And so we'll start seeing could he be the next leader? Is he the one that's going to be the son of promise? And so you start to see his character traits. Judah said to his brothers, "What gain is it that we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and lay our hands on him. For he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened. So why don't they decide to kill Joseph? I see a couple of reasons. Luke?
They would probably feel really guilty on that.
Okay, yeah, I think that is one of that. Zach? Yeah, so I think on the one hand, they're greedy men, and they think they can profit. They might as well get some money out of this. There's no gain if they just kill him. And then the other thing is, Judah appeals to it being the more righteous way. He wants to feel kind of a little bit good about himself. It's like, he is our brother. Like, we're not so bad that we would kill him. We're just going to sell him as a slave. And that's self-righteousness. It's like, no matter how bad you're actually being, you can always think of somebody that's a little worse than you and feel a little bit better about yourself. And so Judah, and this theme for him is going to come up in the next story as well. He is a self-righteous person. He's wicked. He's greedy. But he still thinks of himself very highly and as being a good person. And so his brothers listened, because Judah is the de facto leader. He's the one that his brothers listened to. And you'll see this throughout the rest of the story as well. And they come and they cover up Joseph being sold into slavery. So they took Joseph's tunic, slaughtered a male goat, dipped the tunic in blood. So Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. Then all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, "Surely I will go down to Sheol in my mourning for my son." So his father wept for him. Nobody speaks the truth. Again, Reuben was hatching a plan to try to save Joseph, maybe to try to earn back favor with his father. But he wasn't genuine. He didn't genuinely care. If he genuinely cared about his father, Joseph, he wouldn't have been okay with the ruse. He wouldn't have let his father just sit there and weep while knowing that actually Joseph is alive. And they could have brought comfort to Jacob at any time, but they didn't do that. So their comforting is disingenuous, but Jacob's mourning is obviously very real. And so this is the low point of the story. Despite being the son of promise, Jacob's life is tragic. It's very disappointing, sad, mournful. He does not feel like he is the son of promise in that moment. And despite being righteous, not following in the wickedness of his brothers, Joseph gets betrayed. In fact, it's the very act of him trying to be faithful that causes all the bad things to happen on his life. He's betrayed, sold into slavery, falsely accused, unjustly thrown into prison, and forgotten there. So this is the low point of the story. And I think it does teach us something. Life's not fair. Have you been told that before? Hopefully. Yep. Yeah. It's a good thing to be reminded of and to be told, especially as kids. Because there's this, especially as you start becoming a teenager, you start getting this angst of like, I must be treated fairly. There must be, if I don't get what I want, that's not fair. Other kids are getting what they want. But it's helpful to be reminded life's not fair. Not now, not never. Why is that? Why is life not fair?
Because we didn't do anything to have our life, and Jesus still came and died on the cross for us.
Yep. I think that's the very first thing is, first of all, we very much overestimate what we actually deserve. The fair thing would be God abandoning us and us going to hell. That would be the fair thing. Anything you get beyond that is a good gift from God. So we very much overestimate what we actually deserve. And ultimately, God is sovereign. He can choose to do what he wants. He can choose to save Jacob, make Jacob the son of promise and not Esau. He's sovereign. He has his electing purposes. He can do what he wants. Also, oftentimes we don't actually know what's best for us. We think us getting something is good and fair and best for us. I'm sure Joseph in the moment didn't think him being sold into slavery was the best thing to happen, right? But Joseph doesn't actually know what's best for him. Joseph doesn't know what's best for the family. Joseph doesn't know what God can do through all these circumstances. God is the only one that knows. And getting what you want, when you want it, how you want it, isn't actually good for you. It's not actually the best thing for you, is to get exactly what you want when you want it. And this verse back in Genesis 50, the last chapter, it really is a verse that explains the entire story. So we have to go there because this is what's going on in the whole story. This is Joseph talking to his brothers. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to do what has happened on this day to keep many people alive. So Joseph, he has a faith in God that sees he's doing something through all these difficult circumstances. And we see this in Romans 8:28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. So if you're a Christian, no matter how bad the circumstances are, you can trust that God is going to work them for good. Maybe not even while you're alive. Maybe you don't actually see that until you're dead. And in heaven, where God can show you what he was doing. But life's not fair because God is doing a work in the lives of his people that is the ultimate good. And God is going to do that even in this dysfunctional family. And the reason he does that, he chooses weak people, he chooses fragile vessels, people that don't deserve things, because he wants to get the glory. He wants to get the praise and the credit for what happens. If God just chose the people that seem smart and together and deserve it, they would get the glory. But God does things in a way where he actually gets the glory. And I want to apply this real quick to the prosperity gospel, which is a false gospel out there. And I think the story of Joseph is a great answer to it. So we'll apply it real quick. Does anybody know, though, what the prosperity gospel is? Anybody heard that before? No. Luke.
Sow a seed and you will get much more in return.
Yep. So you hear the prosperity, right? Prosper, basically having wealth and health and all the good stuff happen to you. And the idea is that's what God wants. God wants you to live the good life. So here's a quote from some people in that movement. It's God's will for you to live in prosperity instead of poverty. It's God's will for you to pay your bills and not be in debt. and he would add elsewhere, it's God's will for you to be healthy and happy. So what do? Do you want a 100-fold return on your money? Give and let God multiply it back to you. Give to who, by the way? So this is Kenneth Copeland. Who does he want you? Yeah, to get Kenneth Copeland, right. Do you want a 100-fold return on your money? Give and let God multiply it back to you. No bank in the world offers this kind of return. Praise the Lord. It's a blasphemy. Believe it in your heart, say it with your mouth. That is the principle of faith. You can have what you say. So there's this idea of, if you ever heard name it and claim it. I'm going to name that I want health. I'm going to declare that I want money, and God will give it to you if you just have enough faith. You can do something about your circumstances. You can control God bringing prosperity in your life. So how would you respond to someone that believes these things? Because this is a very common belief. It's common in America. Unfortunately, I mean, you hear this from a lot of our missionaries in Africa. This idea, because they're very poor, obviously, and so people are coming to them as Christians that have all this wealth, and they're like, look, you could be like me. Just give me the money you do have. So it's a very common destructive thing in the world. How do you respond to somebody like this?
Read the Bible.
Okay, that's a good one. And what specifically should they read and learn about? Yeah, Joseph. Joseph's a great example, right? Not everything works out good for him. And there's tons and tons and tons of passages that deal with suffering. And so we'll just look at a couple and see that being a Christian, you have to actually count the cost. It's not the ticket to the good life. Philippians 1:29, for to you it has been granted for Christ's sake, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for his sake. So it says there that two things have been granted. So two things are a gift from God in this passage. What are those two things that are a gift from God? Ellie, what do you see? What's one thing that's a gift from God in Philippians 1:29? Shannon. So it's been granted. What's been granted, though? Aya? To believe, yep. So to believe in him. So if you have faith, that's a gift from God. What's one more thing? One more thing in the passage. And to suffer. So suffering is guaranteed and granted as a gift to Christians. It's a gift to suffer. Does that sound right? Sound like a bummer, maybe? Why is it a gift? Why should you view suffering as a gift?
Because the only thing it will do is draw us closer to Christ.
Yep, that's exactly right. God uses it to grow his people to be more like Christ. And so it's also helpful to remember this in your life if you feel like you're suffering. And maybe you should also be reminded that it's not your parents' job to make you happy and give you what you want. Sometimes it's your parents' job to make you suffer. Obviously, I don't mean like in an abusive way, but like if they're just giving you everything you want and try to be your best friend, like that's not actually good for you, right? So next time, so now if you respond to that, it'll be like, wow, they're really good at that. You may not be thinking about suffering the right way. They're actually trying to grow you, and challenge can grow you. Luke 14:27, whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? So then, none of you can be my disciple who does not give up all of his own possessions. You must die to yourself and give up living your life for your sake. This is what it means to be a Christian. It doesn't mean obeying because, you get in trouble less. Obeying because, following Christ because your life will get easier. You have to actually give up on everything you want. Give up on chasing the world and what it promises. You have to give up everything in order to have Christ. And that's not to earn it. It doesn't mean you make yourself, righteous enough that now God will look on you in favor. But you have to give it all up because nothing else matters to you. If you love Christ, then you're going to, not see every other pursuit of yours as being the most important thing, but seeing it all as lost because you get to gain Christ.
Another good example for prosperity gospel believers who, to give them a good part of the Bible to think on, is the apostles of the early church. Most of them actually, like every single one of them, had died a pretty brutal death.
Yeah.
It was with lives full of persecution, except for John, who died
Yeah.
of age.
Right, they were all persecuted, which is another evidence like they really believed he rose from the dead, right? They didn't die for a lie, and so in their case, things didn't work out well in the end for them unless they have a perspective of God and what God was doing. So that's a great example. So to be a Christian, you have to actually count the cost. Now, we get a little interlude in Joseph's story. Again, we hit the low point, and we're wondering what's going to happen next. And we see a story about Judah. So Judah, and some people say with the story of Joseph, it's really the story of Joseph and Judah, the story of two brothers. They're contrasted and compared often. And so with Judah, we have an example of a repentant sinner. So Judah, he moves in with Canaanites. He even marries one, and he commits a heinous sin. So going and integrating with the Canaanites is an example of worldliness, engaging with the world, what it promises, living like the world. And he was attracted to that. The world can be very attractive. So he commits a heinous sin, and his daughter-in-law commits a lesser sin against Judah. But again, Judah is very self-righteous, and it offends him greatly. And so his response to his daughter-in-law's sin is, bring her out and let her be burned. We're going to burn her to death because of her sin. But then Judah's his heinous sin is actually exposed to the world. And you start to see Judah have I don't know if you'd call it an epiphany, but a realization and a change of mind. He doesn't actually shift blame for his sin, but he recognizes she is more righteous than I. This is the exact opposite of self-righteousness. Instead of looking at someone else's sin and comparing yourself and being like, well, I'm not that bad, he actually is like, oh, actually, I am the sinner. I am not the righteous one. She is more righteous than I. So he recognizes his self-righteousness for the first time, and he has a change of mind and actually turns from his sin. And so this signals a hope, like maybe something's going to change with the brothers. Maybe they won't continue in the way that they've gone. And it also provides a contrast to Joseph. So Joseph, he doesn't join the world. He doesn't join in the sin and the temptation of the world like Judah did. So we come to Joseph, the faithful slave. So Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian official of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. And Yahweh was with Joseph, so he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now his master saw that Joseph was with him, and how Yahweh caused all that he did to succeed in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended on him, and he appointed him overseer of his house, and all that he had owned he gave in his hand. So why was Joseph successful? Why was he successful? According to the passage. Yeah, because Yahweh was with them, right? So and we'll probably look at some of these traits more next week. But Joseph, he obviously was very trustworthy. He was responsible. He was wise. And he was faithful in a little. He was faithful in a little, so the master gave him more responsibility. That's if you want more responsibility from your parents, if you want to be trusted with more, like the only way to do that is to show responsibility and trustworthiness in the little things that you're given where you're at. And it's only after that can you be trusted with more. But ultimately, the success is always, like you said, attributed to Yahweh, not Joseph's character. So even in Joseph being sold into slavery, you see God's hand still working in those circumstances. God has not abandoned Yahweh. And so because Yahweh is the one attributed to this, Yahweh is the one that, again, gets the glory for any success of Joseph, and that's true for any success of anyone. and he's not forgotten. God is still in control. He's still doing a work. And next we see, though, a temptation that comes, and Joseph being a faithful fleer. So Potiphar's wife is tempting Joseph to sin. And we see sort of an example and a framework for how to fight temptation in general. And what you really see with Joseph is he doesn't minimize, justify, or make excuses for sin. He doesn't say, like, well, I've had all these bad things happen to me. I guess I could give in a little. It's like, well, yeah, I probably won't get caught. I could maybe do it. Oh, yeah, other people would do it in my circumstances. Why do I have to be faithful? He doesn't minimize. He doesn't justify. He doesn't make any excuses whatsoever. Instead, you see what he says here and why he refused. It's, behold, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he's given all that he owns into my hand. So first of all, he sees it as a betrayal to his master who's given him many things and his position as a steward. So sin, it often creates and is a betrayal against many relationships in your life. So he sees it as that. He also calls it for what it is. He doesn't call it, a mistake. He doesn't call it an indiscretion, a little bit of a problem. Oh, I messed up. No, he calls sin sin. He calls it a great evil. And who does he say he's sinning against? Ultimately, in verse 9 there.
Against God.
Yeah, against God. So he ultimately sees it as against a sin against God. It's a sin, in a sense, against many people, but ultimately a bit against God. So if you want to resist temptation, ultimately you have to have a view that God, the omniscient one who sees everything you do, he sees your life. And you sinning is a sin against him and a betrayal against him. He's your creator. He owns you. He's giving you everything. If you're a Christian, he's redeemed you and saved you. So sin is ultimately a betrayal against God. And in this situation, you also see something dealing with boy-girl relationships in general, but also other worldliness issues. One is, what you shouldn't do is ask, what am I allowed to do? How far can I go? It's like, maybe a question is like, oh, what age can I date? What age, what can I do? That's not the right way. If that's what you're doing, you've kind of like lost it already. The right question to ask is instead, what glorifies God? What protects me and others against sin and against temptation? So it's not about like just figuring out what rule and then get as close to that rule as possible. Instead, it's about glorifying God and making decisions for him. If that's your mindset, then the rules don't matter as much. If your parents are having to like make all these rules for you, like it's probably because you don't have this mindset of wanting to serve, love, and glorify God. If you have that, then rules become less necessary. And then we see the response. Then she seized him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." And he left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside. So he fled. He escaped the temptation. And this is the pattern. So with temptation, the goal isn't be like, well, how close can I get? How much temptation can I handle? It's like, no, just like often the wisest thing is just to get out. Just avoid it altogether. That's even the Lord's Prayer, right? Like, do not lead me in temptation. Like, I don't even want to go there. I don't even want to get close to it. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed that he does not fall. So if you're proud, if you think you can handle it, that's usually the first sign that things are going to not go so well and you are going to fall. No temptation is overtaking you but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able. So you don't have to sin. Well, I should say, if you're a Christian, you don't have to sin. You're no longer in bondage to sin. The Christ's death on the cross has removed the power of sin over believers. So in any instance, you can overcome and not fall into sin during a temptation. But notice how you avoid it, how you avoid falling. It says, but with the temptation, God will provide a way of escape also. There's a way out of that situation, out of that temptation, so that you will be able to endure it. And then we see here Potiphar's wife then lies about him. So she's calling him, trying to seduce him, and then right after he says no, she throws him under the bus and gets him thrown in prison. I mean, Potiphar may have realized that this wasn't all Joseph's fault, which is why he didn't just kill him. But I think there's a helpful principle here. Don't confuse passion with love. If you're dating, if somebody comes to you and says like, "Oh, I love you so much," like don't believe them. It's probably not true. The only way you should believe somebody when they tell you that is if they've actually gone and put in the work, doing it under the parents, went and talked to the father, and then eventually goes down on one knee and proposes. Then you can maybe believe them when they say, "I love you." Well, you should probably. If you say yes, you should. So, I mean, that's why, I mean, even I personally, I didn't say that to my wife until I actually proposed to her. So don't confuse passion with love. It's not the same thing. And Joseph, again, is punished for doing the right thing. He cared more about protecting his righteousness than his reputation. So this is something that's true. Like, he could have went back. In fact, if he would have sinned, his life would have been easier. He maybe wouldn't have got caught. Maybe he wouldn't have been thrown in prison. He could have went back and tried to be like, actually, I need my garment. Like, he could have did that, right? He was the guy. He could have went in and just grabbed it and avoided the whole situation. But he just got out of there. And because he cared more about doing the righteous thing than about trying to guard his reputation of him. And I think this is something that's true. I mean, it can be easy to, reputation is one of those things where it can be very easy to be like, oh, well, I should try to protect my reputation. I should try to keep it. And some of that's okay, but if you start sinning, if you start not doing the right thing because of that, it's gonna lead to problems. And in this case, though, with Joseph, it led him to go back into the prison. And now he's again in the pit. So it actually uses the term dungeon, pit, the same term that is used for when his brothers threw him into the pit. So he's once again in prison. His righteousness has not paid off in good circumstances. And you have to ask, like, what is going to happen? How is God going to do this? And what we see in the story of Joseph and the story of history, really, is God turns things on their head. He actually uses even sin, he uses suffering to fulfill his good purposes. And you see this irony throughout the story. By the brothers trying to crush Joseph's dream, trying to kill him, destroy it, sell him to slavery, make sure that Joseph never rules over them, they actually are the agents, and their actions cause God to fulfill the dreams. And by being righteous, Joseph is actually punished, and he's thrown into prison. But that is what causes him to meet the cupbearer and for circumstances to be brought about for him to eventually appear before Pharaoh. And then by being forgotten in prison, it guarantees that Joseph will be remembered, but at the right time, or can actually do much good. Imagine if this didn't happen. Imagine if Joseph wasn't sold into slavery, or he didn't do the right thing. What would that happen? Like, the whole point of the story would have been lost, right? He wouldn't have appeared before Joseph. He wouldn't have saved many people. And so because of this, God gets all the glory for his extraordinary wisdom and how he chooses to fulfill his promises. Again, if you were to write this story, if you were to be like, oh, God, you want Jacob's family to be built into a large nation, okay, great. I'll give you the perfect plan for that. You would never have come up with this plan. Only God could come up with this plan. And this is how God works through history. So again, by the people, the Jews, Romans, by them killing Jesus, it actually is the thing that secures salvation for all the nations. Israel's rejection of Jesus is what causes them to fulfill their true purpose, which is to bless all the nations. And this always is the case. As soon as somebody tries to thwart what God's doing in the world, it actually brings about his very ends. In the story of Joseph, we see the story of God's faithfulness and his loving kindness, that no matter how bad it seems, like most of you are not in very bad circumstances, right? But like you will, as you grow up, you become adults, like you will face many difficult circumstances. It won't seem like God's doing what's in your best interest. But if you're a Christian, you can trust that no matter how dire, how bad it seems, God is there and he's doing a work. And so then I want to ask, who will you be when life gets hard? Because trials, they'll bring out the true you. People will, you can't fake it when things are very difficult. So some lessons we learned from Joseph is don't play the victim. Don't complain. Right now, the world sells you victimhood, kind of both sides. You're the victim because you're oppressed by, this powerful group, or you're the victim because of immigration and people flooding in. Like everybody will find an angle to sell you victimhood and why you should just be depressed because of how poorly you've been treated. Everyone sells this. Don't believe it. Take responsibility for your life and your decisions. Don't just blame others. Also, don't react in jealousy, anger, or bitterness. You saw this with Joseph's brother, and it just eats them up, and it destroyed, and very destructive. And also, don't feel entitled to receive certain treatment, to be treated fairly. And don't give up. So Joseph, you see in here, like very many people would just give up, would just be resigned, be depressed. He takes initiative on multiple occasions. He even takes initiative to try to change his circumstances. He was not passive. He was faithful even when life got hard. And be faithful no matter where God has put you. Like you don't need to wait for better circumstances. You don't need to wait for your parents to give you more responsibility in something. You can be faithful exactly where you are and take initiative. And ultimately trust in God's wisdom to make better decisions than you. God makes better decisions than you do. And if you trust in him, if you follow him, he will lead your life in a way that brings true blessing. Even if it's very difficult, even if it's not an easy life, he'll lead you in a life of faithfulness to him, which will pay off for eternity. And ultimately, you can and should trust God's promises. God can fulfill his promises. No matter how bad it looks, no matter how difficult, God is faithful. He cannot lie. And his promises bring greater fulfillment, greater joy than what the world entices you with. So when life gets hard, it shows who you are, and you can, like Joseph, act in faithfulness, not just because this is just some like character trait, right? But because of, like Joseph, you can have a view of God that's bigger than your bad circumstances.